In the 1800s, newspapers were full of tall tales. Giants, monsters, miracles. But hidden in the noise are reports that evoke the same characteristics as modern UFO sightings just a century earlier. Ever since David Grush's seminal UFO interview, I've been closely tracking the UFO-UAP issue. And the modern UFO landscape is full of breadcrumbs, some real, some BS. Most of the information being scrutinized is centered around 20th and 21st century sightings, people, and places. And that makes sense. If we follow the narrative that at some point, either as a result of the Roswell crash or the earlier Magenta crash, the US government took possession of at least one UFO, then we can follow a clear path, or a completely jumbled one. A path that shows us decades of refined, siloed practice to hide UFOs. Whether that be reverse engineering crashed material, crafting public narratives.
Welcome back to Special Report. Tonight we continue our series looking at unidentified, anomalous,
tracking and acquiring new UAPs or controlling who has access to any part of the bigger picture. It's bureaucracy. Messy, full of half-truths and all-out lies, and of course, plenty of NDAs. But what about UFO sightings that happened before bureaucracy got complete control of the narrative? What do we know about the post-industrial revolution but pre-nuclear world where UFOs were present, but not the forces that hid them? The 1800s. Pre-World Wars, pre-nuclear, pre-AI. Before all the events that many ufologists believed increased UFO activity. A time when humans were advancing rapidly and UFOs were being seen. So in this video, we're going to go back. Not to chariots in the sky or light battles over Nuremberg, but to a modern world experiencing anomalies without the cleanup crew we now have. By the way, please like, subscribe, and comment. It only takes a second, but it means the world for a small channel like this hoping to produce better and better content. So thank you. And with that, let's get into 1800s UFOs. 1800, the Baton Rouge Crash. Now, to understand how different a UFO event was before bureaucracy got involved, we should look back to the turn of the century. On April 5th, 1800, Baton Rouge, Louisiana was still the frontier. Nature, thick with swampy vegetation, dark, quiet nights, and uncharted territory to the west. The report came from a man named William Dunbar, and this is where source material becomes vital. Dunbar was a significant figure. He was a well-known astronomer and mathematician at the time. And it's through his correspondence directly with then Vice President Jefferson that we get this story. Dunbar wrote that on a clear night, a phenomenon occurred that shook the region. Witnesses described a body of immense magnitude appearing in the sky. Dunbar compared its size to a large house. But it wasn't just a streak in the sky, it was a substantial object. The object rushed over the horizon and casted both heat and light so intense that it illuminated the ground and warmed the witnesses' skin. Witnesses saw this object only 200 feet above them in the sky. And whatever this wasn't just seen above the trees. Witnesses saw this thing close up, heard and saw it crash. Dunbar claimed the object struck the earth with a violent impact in the forests near Baton Rouge. In his words, the crash caused a very sensible earthquake. Search parties went looking for it and found not a crater impact, but a path of complete obliteration. Dunbar described that a considerable part of the earth had been burned and damaged. It was reported that trees had been flattened, crushed, not merely uprooted or snapped by the wind. So, what was this? Well, Jefferson soon became president, but it appears that neither he nor Dunbar ever got answers about such an odd event taking place. And other than being preserved in the transactions of the American Philosophical Society, it was merely treated as a raw scientific anomaly. Now, contemporary research on this event is obviously very limited, but there is support that the Baton Rouge crash was really an anomalous event. An object the size of a large house falling so close overhead that witnesses could feel the heat implies that if the object was a meteor, then the damage, impact, and debris should have been catastrophic to anyone in the vicinity. Yet the described impact is more consistent with a small meteor, but that doesn't quite work either. because the object is described as moving too slowly to fit what we know about meteors in the atmosphere. So, what was this object? How did it disappear before investigators could find it after a crash of that magnitude? Frustratingly, we just don't know. 1853, the Burritt College objects. Okay, now let's jump forward in time about 53 years. Out of the untamed bayou and up into the middle of Tennessee, Spencer. The date is June 1st, 1853. Burritt College was a small but serious institution basically isolated from most of the big cities of the United States. At 4 o'clock in the morning, Burritt College professor A.C. Carnes was watching the sunrise with several of his students. That morning, they would see something that would completely defy any 19th century understanding of physics at all, and honestly, any modern understanding of physics. Carnes would go on to write a detailed letter to the Scientific American describing the incident. Carnes wrote of 2 luminous objects appearing in the dawn sky. The first was a small, luminous object which Carnes described as a new moon. The second object he described as a large star. This large star appeared directly to the east of the small sphere. Carnes wrote that the smaller sphere began to fluctuate in size, growing and shrinking while the larger body moved in relation, with both hovering, shifting, and maintaining some sort of formation with each other. Carnes wrote that as the sun rose that morning, these objects did not disappear. Their size, shape, and luminosity all remained exactly the same. Now, this is a short story, but I think it's important to understand the lexicon that Carnes was working off of at the time. He described these objects as 1, a new moon, and 2, a large star. He was using terms that he knew to compare with objects that clearly weren't either of these things. A new moon and a large star don't interact with each other the way that he was describing. The fact that they remain visible in the sky actually suggests that they may have been so close that they were in the atmosphere. And taken with the maneuvers that he described, it honestly sounds like this was some sort of aerial display. Could it have been a natural phenomena? I'm sure, but I have no answer for this one. 1860, the Wilmington, Delaware pale blue lights. 7 years after Burritt College, we find ourselves in Wilmington, Delaware. And this account is significant because of the proximity the craft or object was to the witnesses. On July 13th, 1860, the residents of Wilmington looked up to see a massive streak of pale blue light, possibly 200 feet long, cruising over the city at an altitude of only 100 feet. For modern context, that's lower than a news helicopter flies. The reports at the time claim it was moving straight and level. No arcing and no indication that it was falling out of the sky. But it doesn't end there. This object was being trailed by 3 red glowing balls. Now, sadly, we have almost no other evidence for this story other than what's written in the Wilmington, Delaware Tribune. So we'll take it directly from the source, and I'll quote. The front of the object was a strange black cloud, while behind were 3 very red glowing balls. After several more moments, a 4th glowing red ball appeared. This 4th ball appeared to be completely independent of the main craft. Now, just to pull back for a second, I find it very interesting that they specifically used the word craft here. And I wonder why they used that term. I'm sure it plays into what the residents of Wilmington, Delaware saw that day. They didn't describe a star or a moon. They specifically said in this paper, a craft. This 4th ball turned in a different direction to it and headed southeast over the Delaware River. And that's where the story ends. This one is wild and has very little other context to it. But it just goes to show that something was happening in the skies over America during this period. 1865, the James Lumley crash. For our next and final account, we're going to go forward 5 years. Let's escape the cities, drop out of Burritt College, it's going to fail anyway, and find ourselves deep in the remote, untamed wilderness of the American West. It's September of 1865. The Civil War has just ended. The law is fractured, and the frontier is a dangerous place to be. We find ourselves near Cadet Pass in the region of the Great Falls of the Missouri River. And here's where we meet James Lumley, a trapper. Now, just for a second, let's picture what his life entails. He lives in a world of nature and silence, reading the landscape for tracks, weather, and danger. We can assume that Lumley was probably a very hard and serious man. On one particular day, Lumley was setting his traps when the skies opened. He reported seeing a massive, bright body fragmenting in the atmosphere. Unlike a meteor that burns up high in the ionosphere, this thing came down and exploded with a sound like heavy artillery shaking the ground beneath his feet. But of course, Lumley, being who he was, didn't run from this. He ran towards it. So the next day, he tracked whatever this was through the forest. Apparently, he found timber that had been mowed down, giant pine trees snapped, and a path where nothing remained. And at the end of that path, he found the wreckage. And this is where the story gets really interesting and uncomfortable for skeptics that want to dismiss Lumley as someone that was just trying to get attention. Lumley described finding a stone-like object. Okay, not really UFO-like yet. He said whatever this was clearly manufactured and embedded in the earth. But here's the detail that really stands out. Lumley said this object had been split open, revealing some sort of mechanical components, and that on these components was his words, hieroglyphics. Now, if you know your UFO history, you're going to know the importance of hieroglyphics and the UFO connection. Think back to the Roswell crash. It's that specific detail that Major Jesse Marcel mentioned before the gag order came down on him. But of course, Lumley didn't have any gag order. He was standing in the woods in Montana in 1865. And because it was 1865, the Army didn't show up. No one in a black suit threatened him that we know about. The evidence just sat there, exposed to the elements and waiting for the recovery team that would never show up. Now, in this video, I covered some of the fairly obscure, albeit important, 19th century UFO stories that I could find. But that's not all of them. I skipped over a couple of the major ones, like the Aurora crash in Texas, and of course, the famous flying airship wave. So I'm leaving this open for a part 2. And if you guys want to see that, just let me know. And other than that, thanks for watching.